The murder of JonBenéт Ramsey is a story that won't go away. It's been decades, but people are still fascinated, horrified, and confused. On Christmas night, 1996, a 6-year-old girl was killed in her own home in Boulder, Colorado. Her name was JonBené. She was a child beauty queen. Her parents were John and Patsy Ramsey. They were wealthy and prominent. The case had everything: a beautiful child, a rich family, a bizarre crime scene. For a long time, the world focused on two main possibilities. Either an intruder broke into the house and killed JonBenet, or her parents, John and Patsy, were somehow involved. The police seemed to lean toward the parents. The public was divided. But over the years, a third theory has grown stronger. It has been talked about in books, documentaries, and online forums. It's the theory that the killer was JonBenet's older brother, Burke. He was 9 years old at the time. This idea is disturbing. It's hard to imagine a 9-year-old boy killing his little sister, and it's even harder to imagine his parents covering it up. But the people who believe this theory say the evidence points in that direction. They argue it's the only explanation that makes sense of all the strange details of the case. So let's look at the Burke Did It theory. We'll examine the arguments, the evidence people point to, and how it all supposedly happened. This isn't about proving guilt. It's about understanding the theory that has become a major part of the JonBenet Ramsey story. To understand the theory, you have to go back to the beginning. The morning of December 26, 1996. Patsy Ramsey says she woke up and went downstairs to make coffee. On the back staircase, she found a ransom note. It was long, 2.5 pages. It was written on a notepad from inside the house with a pen from inside the house. The note said a small foreign faction had kidnapped JonBenet. It demanded $118,000 for her safe return. The amount was almost the exact size of a bonus John Ramsey had recently received from his company. But Patsy called 911. Her call is famous now. She was frantic, screaming that her daughter was gone. The police arrived, and this is where things started to go wrong. The police didn't secure the house as a crime scene. They let friends and family come over. People walked all through the house, cleaning the kitchen, touching things. John Ramsey was allowed to wander around. The scene was contaminated. For hours, everyone acted like it was a kidnapping. But the kidnappers never called. The instructions in the note said they would call between 8 and 10 a.m. The call never came. Later that day, a detective asked John Ramsey and a friend to search the house one more time. John went straight to the basement. He went into a small, windowless room called the wine cellar. And there on the floor, he found his daughter's body. She was wrapped in her favorite white blanket. She had duct tape over her mouth. A cord was tied tightly around her neck, attached to a broken paintbrush handle. It was a garrote. She had also been struck on the head. An autopsy would later show she had an 8-inch skull fracture. That head blow was the cause of death. She was likely unconscious or dead before she was strangled. There were also signs of a sexual assault. From that moment on, the case became a mess of confusion and suspicion. The police focused on the parents. John and Patsy hired their own lawyers and investigators. They insisted an intruder killed their daughter, and Burke, the 9-year-old son, was there the whole time. He was supposedly asleep in his room when his mother called 911. The police interviewed him, but he was a child. He didn't offer much. He became a quiet figure in the background of a massive media storm. The Burke Did It theory starts with a simple, tragic event. It wasn't a planned murder. It was an accident. The theory goes like this. Late on Christmas night, after the family got home from a party, JonBenet and Burke were downstairs. Patsy had put out some pineapple and a glass of tea for Burke. JonBenet, who loved pineapple, might have snuck a piece from his bowl. This made Burke angry. He was known to have a temper sometimes. In a fit of rage, he grabbed the nearest heavy object. Many theorists believe it was a heavy black flashlight that was found on the kitchen counter. He hit JonBenet on the head with it. He didn't need to kill her, he was just a kid having a tantrum. But the blow was devastating. It fractured her skull. She fell to the floor unconscious and bleeding. This is where the parents come in. According to the theory, John and Patsy discovered what had happened. They found their daughter dying or already dead, and they saw their son standing there. They were faced with a horrible choice. Call the police and tell them their son had just killed their daughter, or try to protect him. The theory says they chose to protect him. In a state of panic and grief, they decided to stage a crime scene. They had to make it look like someone else did this, someone from the outside. So the cover-up began. John Ramsey carried his daughter's body down to the basement. He placed her in the wine cellar. He wanted her hidden, but not so hidden that she wouldn't be found eventually. Then, Patsy Ramsey sat down with a notepad and a pen from her own kitchen. She started writing the ransom note. This explains why the note is so strange. Real ransom notes are short and to the point. This one was rambling. It used weird phrases like "and hence," and quoted movies like Dirty Harry. It was written on their paper, with their pen. Handwriting experts later said they couldn't rule Patsy out as the author. Some were almost certain she wrote it. She was trying to create a story, a narrative of a kidnapping by a foreign faction. She made the ransom amount $118,000 because it was a number familiar to them. It wasn't a random figure. While Patsy wrote the note, John was in the basement with JonBenét's body. The theory suggests he created the garrote, the cord and the broken paintbrush handle. He wanted it to look like the work of a sadistic killer. He tightened it around her neck. He might have done this to make sure she was dead, or just to make the staging more convincing. The staging also included the sexual assault. This is the darkest part of the theory. To make it look like a sexual predator had been there, one of the parents may have used the paintbrush handle to cause the vaginal injury found on JonBenét's body. It was a horrific act designed to throw the police off their son's trail. They put duct tape over her mouth. They wrapped her in the blanket. Everything they did after that was part of the act. The frantic 911 call from Patsy. The shock and confusion when police arrived. They were performing, they were grieving parents, but they were also hiding a terrible secret. This explains why they seemed so uncooperative to the police. They weren't hiding their own guilt, the theory says. They were hiding Burke's. So what evidence do people point to when they make this case? There are several key pieces. First, there's the pineapple. The autopsy found undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach. This meant she had eaten it shortly before she died. John and Patsy had told police that JonBenet was asleep when they got home from the party. They didn't mention her eating anything, but on the kitchen table, police found a bowl of pineapple with a spoon in it. Miss Burke's fingerprints were on the bowl. Patsy's were on the glass of tea next to it. JonBenet's prints were not found on the bowl, but that doesn't mean she didn't eat from it. The pineapple places JonBenet and Burke together, awake and eating, at a time when their parents said they were asleep. It provides the setup for the argument and the accidental blow to the head. Then there is Burke's behavior. In interviews with police and psychologists shortly after the murder, his behavior was seen as odd by some. He seemed detached. He didn't show much emotion when talking about his sister. He would sometimes avoid questions or reenact the event with toys in a way that some experts found disturbing. Of course, the counter-argument is simple. He was a 9-year-old child who had just experienced an unimaginable trauma. There is no right way for a child to act in that situation. His behavior could have been a sign of shock, not guilt. Years later, as a young man, Burke did an interview with Dr. Phil. His behavior in that interview was also widely discussed. He smiled frequently while talking about his sister's murder. To many viewers, it seemed inappropriate and strange. Again, proponents of the theory saw this as a sign of something being wrong, a kind of nervous or inappropriate emotional response that hinted at a hidden truth. But others saw it as a sign of social awkwardness, a young man uncomfortable in the spotlight, trying his best to cope with painful questions. He has always denied any involvement. The 911 call is another piece of the puzzle. At the end of Patsy's frantic call, she seems to think she has hung up the phone, but the line remains open for a few more seconds. The recording is faint, but some audio experts have enhanced it. They claim you can hear 3 distinct voices. Patsy, now in a calm voice, asks, "What did you do? Help me, Jesus." John's voice is heard saying, "We're not speaking to you." And some believe a third, childlike voice can be heard saying something like, "What did you find?" If this enhancement is accurate, it would be explosive. It suggests the parents knew what happened from the very beginning, and it would place Burke awake, and at the scene not asleep in his bed. Other experts, however, say the recording is too garbled to be sure of what is being said. They say it's like seeing faces in the clouds. People hear what they want to hear. The state of the house is also a major point. There were no signs of a forced entry. A basement window was broken, but there was a spider web in the corner that seemed undisturbed. A suitcase was placed below the window, as if to help someone climb out, but there were no footprints in the snow outside. The scene just didn't look like a real break-in. It looked staged. Everything used in the crime, the notepad, the pen, the duct tape, the cord, the blanket, was from inside the Ramsey house. An intruder would have had to come in with nothing, find all these items in the dark, commit the murder, write a 3-page note, and then leave without a trace. It seems unlikely. Investigators who support the Burke theory also point to the family's dynamic. There were stories that Burke had a history of behavioral problems. A doctor's report mentioned that he once hit JonBenet in the face with a golf club about a year before her death, leaving a scar. There were also stories about him smearing feces on a box of chocolates that were a gift for JonBenet. These are presented as evidence of a pattern of jealousy and aggression toward his younger sister, who received a lot of attention for her beauty pageant. To theorists, this makes the idea of a sudden, violent outburst over a bowl of pineapple more plausible. A team of experts, including a former FBI profiler named Jim Clemente, put together a documentary for CBS in 2016. They built a full-scale replica of parts of the Ramsey house. They re-examined all the evidence. Their conclusion was clear: Burke Ramsey killed his sister, and his parents covered it up. They even had an expert swing a child-sized mannequin with a flashlight to show that a 9-year-old boy could, in fact, generate enough force to cause the skull fracture JonBenet suffered. This documentary brought the Burke Did It theory into the mainstream like never before. Burke Ramsey sued CBS for defamation, and the case was settled out of court. So, the theory seems to tie up a lot of the loose ends of the case. The strange ransom note makes sense as a creation of a panicked mother. The lack of forced entry makes sense if the killer was already inside. The pineapple evidence provides a motive, albeit a childish one. The family's strange behavior makes sense if they are hiding a secret. It presents a coherent story from beginning to end. But there are serious problems with this theory. There are strong arguments against it, and one very big piece of evidence that points in a completely different direction. The biggest piece of evidence against the Burke theory is DNA. In 2008, new DNA testing technology allowed scientists to analyze a tiny sample of genetic material found on JonBenét's long john. It belonged to an unknown male. This person was not a Ramsey. His DNA profile has been checked against a national database of convicted offenders, and no match has ever been found. This is often called the intruder DNA. How could an unknown male's DNA be on her clothing if she was killed by her brother and the crime was covered up by her parents? The proponents of the Burke theory have tried to explain it away. They say it could be contamination from the factory where the clothes were made, or a trace amount of DNA transferred from someone else at some point. But for many, this is a huge unexplainable hole in the theory. If there was an intruder, this DNA is proof. The district attorney for Boulder at the time, Mary Lacey, was so convinced by this DNA evidence that she wrote a formal letter to John Ramsey in 2008, officially exonerating him, his late wife Patsy, who had died of cancer in 2006, and their son Burke. She apologized for the suspicion they had lived under for so many years. Not everyone agrees with her conclusion. Other investigators, and even the Boulder Police Department, have said that the DNA evidence is not so clear-cut. They believe it's a mixed sample and doesn't definitively point to an intruder. But it remains the single strongest piece of forensic evidence suggesting someone outside the family was in that house that night. There are other problems with the theory. The sheer complexity and horror of the cover-up is one. Is it really plausible that two parents, in the immediate aftermath of finding their daughter dead at the hands of their son, could calmly and methodically stage such an elaborate scene? Could they write a 3-page ransom note? Could they tie a garrote around their own daughter's neck? Could they inflict a sexual injury on her body? These are monstrous acts. It seems more likely that panicked parents would simply call 911 and try to explain what happened as an accident. To believe the cover-up theory, you have to believe that John and Patsy were capable of a level of cold, calculated deception that is almost inhuman, all while their daughter's body was in the house. And what about Burke himself? The entire theory rests on the idea that a 9-year-old boy hit his sister with a flashlight. While the CBS documentary suggested it was possible, it's still a question. Could a boy that age really deliver a blow so powerful it would crack an adult-sized skull? And if it was an accident, why would the cover-up need to be so violent and sexual in nature? Why not just make it look like she fell and hit her head? The garrote and the staged sexual assault seem to point to a different kind of killer, a more sadistic and prepared one. It seems to go beyond what would be necessary for a simple cover-up. Then there is the lack of a confession. For over 2 decades, the Ramsey family has been under intense scrutiny. Patsy died maintaining her innocence. John and Burke continue to do so. No one has ever slipped up. No friend has ever come forward to say one of the parents confessed to them. In a secret this big, involving at least 2 people, it's rare for it to hold forever. Yet, it has. So, where does that leave us? The Burke Did It theory is compelling. It offers an explanation for some of the most bizarre elements of the case, especially the ransom note. It provides a narrative that connects the dots in a way the intruder theory sometimes struggles to. The pineapple, the 911 call, the family's behavior, it all seems to fit into place if you accept the initial premise of an accident, followed by a cover-up. It turns the story from a mystery about a phantom killer into a dark family tragedy. But it's a theory built largely on circumstantial evidence and psychological interpretation. There is no smoking gun. There is no confession, no witness. No piece of physical evidence directly links Burke to the murder. His fingerprints were on his own cereal bowl in his own kitchen. That's not a crime. His behavior can be interpreted in different ways, and the theory requires you to believe that the parents were not only liars, but also capable of desecrating their child's body to protect their son. And you have to get around the DNA. That unknown male DNA on her clothes is a hard fact. It's a piece of the puzzle that doesn't fit into the neat narrative of the Burke theory. For those who believe in the intruder theory, that DNA is everything. It's the proof that someone else was there. They point to other evidence, like a stun gun mark that some experts claim was on JonBenét's body, and a footprint near her body from a type of boot the family didn't own. In the end, the question of whether Burke Ramsey was the real killer remains just that, a question. It is one of three possible scenarios. An intruder did it, the parents did it, or Burke did it, and the parents covered it up. Each theory has its passionate believers. Each theory has evidence to support it, and each theory has major unanswered questions. The Burke Did It theory has gained so much traction because it feels psychologically plausible to some people. It explains the weirdness of the crime scene better than the intruder theory does. It seems to solve the puzzle. But it's a solution that requires us to believe the absolute worst about a grieving family. It asks us to see a 9-year-old boy as a killer and his parents as monstrously deceptive accomplices. The truth is, we don't know what happened in that big house in Boulder on Christmas night in 1996. The case is still open, but it is no longer an active investigation in the same way. Her key figures have passed away. Memories have faded. The crime scene was compromised from the start. We may never have a definitive answer. The story of JonBenét Ramsey may forever be a collection of competing theories, each one trying to make sense of an unspeakable tragedy. And the theory that her own brother was responsible will always be the most disturbing of them all.